Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some places are not meant to be found. Tonight, we unseal a forgotten archive, a cartographic anomaly that points to a truth deliberately erased from history. The case of Silverton, the village that was removed from the maps. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some places aren't meant to be found. Narrator: we place an almost sacred trust in the maps that define our world. They are our guides, our statements of fact, a consensus reality printed on paper or displayed on a screen. A map tells us what is there: a road, a river, a town. But what does it mean when a map lies? Not by an error of measurement or a simple omission, but by a deliberate, surgical removal. What happens when a place and all its people are scraped from the official record, leaving behind a blank space filled only with questions? This is the story of a phantom on the page, a ghost in the geography of a nation. This is the story of Silverton, the village that was removed from the maps. The search for a place that doesn't exist begins not in the wilderness, but in the sterile quiet of a national archive. It begins with the smell of aging paper and binding glue, with the soft rustle of turning pages. Our journey starts with a figure I call the cartographer's ghost. He isn't a literal phantom, but his presence haunts the very documents that should be his legacy. His name was Alistair Finch, a senior cartographer for the Ordnance survey in post-war Britain. A man of meticulous detail, whose life was dedicated to the unerring accuracy of the printed line. Finch was part of the great resurveying effort after World War II, a project to update the nation's maps for a new era of reconstruction and Cold War paranoia. His colleagues described him as quiet, precise, almost obsessively so. His work was his life. But in late 1954, something changed. His logbooks, usually filled with neat calculations and precise annotations, became erratic. There are margin notes, scribbled in a frantic hand, that official archivists have dismissed as the ramblings of a stressed mind. But when you're looking for a ghost, you learn to read between the lines. One entry, dated October 1954, reads, "They don't want it seen. It's not a correction. It's an excision, a memory hole in the fells." Another, more chilling note simply says, "The silver tarn reflects the wrong sky." Alistair Finch took an early retirement shortly after, citing ill health. He lived out his days in seclusion and passed away in 1978. He left no family, and his personal effects were largely destroyed. But his work remains. And within that work, there is a shadow. The maps he worked on, specifically the sheets covering the remote northern fells, are where the first clues emerge. To understand the erasure, you must first understand the man who was ordered to perform it. You have to feel the tremor in his hand as he drew a new coastline, a new forest boundary, over a place where people lived, loved, and perhaps disappeared. He was the first official to make Silverton vanish, and the evidence suggests it cost him his sanity. He became a ghost, haunted by a village he was forced to bury, under ink and paper. Narrator: this is it. Ordnance Survey Map, Sheet 78, North Pennines, 1st edition, 1948. It is a beautiful piece of work, a tapestry of contour lines, symbols, and names that paint a picture of the land as it was. And right here, Nestled in a small, remote valley, carved out by a tributary of the River Tyne, is a small cluster of buildings. A symbol for a church with a spire, an inn, a post office, and the name printed in elegant serif font, Silverton. It's unassuming. Just one of hundreds of small hamlets dotted across the rugged landscape. According to this official government document in 1948, Silverton was as real as London, Manchester, or Edinburgh. It had a physical location, a grid reference, a place in the world. Now let's look at the next edition. Published in 1955, the same sheet, number 78, the same area, the contour lines are identical, the river follows the same course, the surrounding forests are unchanged, but here, where Silverton should be, there is nothing. Not a ruin, not a marker, not a hint of what came before. The buildings are gone, the church is gone, the name is gone. The land is depicted as empty, undeveloped moorland. The roads that once led to it now simply peter out, becoming anonymous tracks leading nowhere. This is the Anomaly. The Ordinance Survey is one of the most precise, methodical mapping organizations in the world. For a village to be removed, one of two things must have happened. Either the village was physically demolished and erased from the landscape, or a deliberate high-level directive was issued to remove it from the map, regardless of its physical status. The first possibility is terrifying. The complete razing of a village, its church, its homes. Why? There are no records of a dam being built, no reservoir flooding the valley. No military training area was ever gazetted for this specific location, though there are several others in the region. There was no great fire, no natural disaster reported. The second possibility is, in some ways, even more disturbing. It implies a conspiracy of silence, an official, state-sanctioned decision to make a place unhappen, to remove it from the collective memory, to make it impossible to find for anyone relying on official information. This wasn't a simple correction. When a feature is removed or changed, cartographic standards dictate that evidence of the change is recorded in survey notes and revision logs. For Silverton, these documents are either missing or heavily redacted. We filed requests to view the revision notes for sheet 78 between 1949 and 1954. The files we received back were suspiciously thin. Entire pages were blacked out with the official stamp, by order of the Secretary of State. What secret did this tiny village hold that required the full weight of the Official Secrets Act to keep it buried? The 1955 map isn't just a map. It's a statement. It's a warning. It's the closing of a file, the sealing of a tomb. Silverton wasn't just removed. It was redacted from reality. Narrator. If a place is erased from the present, the only place to find it is in the past. The official silence of the 1950s forced our investigation deeper into the archives, into records created long before the need for secrecy arose. We had to hunt for the echoes of Silverton in the vast, dusty catacombs of county records, census returns, and forgotten local histories. And we found them. The name begins to appear in the early 19th century. The 1841 census, the first detailed survey of the British population, lists the township of Silverton. It paints a picture of a small, isolated, and tightly knit community. Population, 112 souls. The primary occupations are listed as lead mining, sheep farming, and other local trades. The names are all local, English and Scottish border names: Robson, Armstrong, Dodd, Milburn, families who had likely lived in that valley for generations. A trade directory from 1885 describes the village in more detail. It mentions the Miner's Rest, the local inn, It lists a blacksmith, a baker, and a small parish church, St. Giles. It notes the village is known for its peculiar quiet and the unusual luster of the water in the small lake, the Tarn, from which it took its name, likely a result of mineral deposits from the lead mines. But even in these mundane historical records, strange details begin to surface. An amateur folklorist's journal from 1922, which we found digitized in a university collection, contains a chapter on the village. The author describes the residents of Silverton as insular and wary of outsiders. He writes of strange folk traditions, observed nowhere else in the region. One ritual he mentions involves the leaving of silver coins by the edge of the tarn at dusk, not as an offering for luck, but to pay a toll to the reflection. He notes that the villagers refuse to have their photographs taken, claiming the silver plate steals a piece of the soul that belongs to the valley. These could be dismissed as the romanticized ramblings of a visitor, but the pattern of insularity is consistent. We cross-referenced census data from 1841 through 1931. The population barely changed over 90 years. It remained stubbornly around 110 to 120 people. Few people moved in, and it seems few people moved out. The same family names dominate every single record. It was a closed system, a community that perpetuated itself, hidden away in its remote valley. This wasn't just a village, it was a world unto itself, a world with its own rules, its own beliefs, and its own secrets. The more we learned about what Silverton was, the more pressing the question became: what happened to these 112 souls? Because after 1953, they don't just vanish from the map. They vanish from every other record, too. Narrator: all official records of Silverton seem to end abruptly. Census data, electoral rolls, tax ledgers, they all run up to the early 1950s and then stop. But there is one record that is often kept separate, held not by the state, but by the church. The parish records. Registers of births, marriages, and deaths. The fundamental chronicle of a community's life. After a lengthy petitioning process, we were granted supervised access to the records for the parish of St. Giles, Silverton, which had been transferred to the diocesan archive in the late 1950s. The final volume is a slim, leather-bound book. Its pages are crisp, the ink still dark. The entries for the years leading up to 1953 are completely normal. We see the familiar village names. A Robson marries a Dodd. A Milburn child is baptized. An elderly Armstrong is laid to rest. The handwriting of the parish vicar, a Reverend Thomas Blackwood, is neat and consistent. Then we turn to the first page for the year 1953. The change is immediate, and it is chilling. The register of births is empty. For the entire year, not a single child was recorded as being born in the village of Silverton. This is a stark anomaly for a community of over 100 people. The marriage register contains only one entry, in January. But it's the final section, the register of deaths, where the story turns into a nightmare. In the 9 months from February to October 1953, there are 47 entries, nearly half the village. The cause of death, dutifully recorded by Reverend Blackwood, becomes increasingly strange. The first few are listed as pneumonia or heart failure. Then in April, the entries change. Exposure to the elements, loss to the fells. In July, a string of entries simply reads, Tarn taken. Reverend Blackwood's immaculate handwriting begins to disintegrate. It becomes a frantic, spidery scrawl. Margin notes appear. Phrases like, the reflection is wrong, and it wants us all. The final entry in the book is dated October 28, 1953. It is for the death of the entire remaining population, listed by family name. The cause of death for every man, woman, and child is a single, terrifying phrase, written in shaking, heavily pressed ink, by invitation. After that, the book is blank. The official story is that the village was evacuated due to a lead contamination scare from the old mines. But there is no record of this evacuation, no record of where the residents were moved, no record of any compensation paid. The parish records of St. Giles don't tell a story of evacuation. They read like the final testament of a community that did not leave, but was consumed. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some places are not meant to be found. Before it was a void on a map, before it became a classified secret whispered in hushed tones, the village of Emberstone was home. It wasn't a place of great historical significance or architectural marvels. It was simply real. Tucked away in a shallow, forgotten valley in the English countryside, it was a tapestry woven from 112 individual lives. We have the records: birth certificates, marriage licenses, census data from 1951. They tell a story of a community bound by generations of shared soil and sky. There was Arthur Hemlock, the postmaster, a man whose encyclopedic knowledge of village gossip was rivaled only by his kindness. There was the Blackwood family, farmers who had tilled the same unforgiving fields since the Tudor era, their hands calloused, but their spirits resilient. Young Thomas Gable, just 7 years old, was known for chasing the steam from the morning train as it passed a mile to the south, the only daily intrusion from the outside world. The village heart was the Shepherd's Crook, a pub run by Eleanor Vance, a widow whose sharp wit was as renowned as her ale. It was here that news was shared, deals were struck, and sorrows were drowned. We have photographs, faded and sepia-toned, showing village fairs on the green, children in their Sunday best outside St. Jude's Chapel, a small stone church whose crooked spire was the first thing you saw when you crested the valley ridge. These images aren't just artifacts, they are ghosts. They capture laughter frozen in time, moments of simple, profound existence. The census lists occupations: blacksmith, baker, schoolteacher, weaver, a self-contained ecosystem of 112 souls, living lives that were predictable, perhaps, but deeply their own. They were not preparing for an ending. There were plans for a new slate roof on the chapel. Christenings were scheduled. Crops were being sown for the next season. Life was moving forward, as it always had. This is the most crucial part of the archive to understand. Emberstone was not a dying village. It was alive, breathing, and then, in an instant, it was gone. The official record ends abruptly. The last entry in the school register is dated October 12, 1953. The last pint was pulled, the last letter delivered. The 112 names that filled the census pages were about to be redacted by an authority far greater than any local council. They were about to become a footnote in a file that would be sealed for 75 years. The change was gradual, almost imperceptible at first. It began not with a declaration, but with the quiet thud of wooden posts being driven into the earth. By the spring of 1952, a year before the end, the villagers of Emberstone had become accustomed to the sight of uniformed men in drab green Land Rovers on the old drovers' roads that crisscrossed the surrounding hills. These were men from the Ministry of Defense. At first, their presence was explained away as routine surveying mapping exercises for national security. But the surveying never seemed to end. The initial single-strand wire fences were slowly, methodically, replaced with formidable chain link, topped with menacing coils of barbed wire. Signs began to appear, stark red and white warnings. Property of the Ministry of Defense. Keep out. The perimeter crept closer, a tightening noose around the valley. The old public footpaths, walked for centuries, were suddenly declared off-limits. Arthur Hemlock, the postmaster, logged official complaints from farmers like the Blackwoods, whose grazing lands were now bisected by these new, unyielding borders. The responses from the ministry were sterile, bureaucratic, and non-committal, citing national interest and ongoing training requirements. Then came the sounds. Strange, low-frequency hums that would start without warning in the dead of night, causing dogs to bark and windows to rattle. Distant, percussive thuds that were not thunder echoed from beyond the ridges. Villagers would later describe a feeling of being watched, a constant, oppressive surveillance that settled over the valley like a permanent fog. The children were the first to notice the cameras, small metallic glints high up on the new steel poles that followed the fence line. The idyllic isolation that had once protected Emberstone now became its prison. The outside world was being surgically cut away. Deliveries became less frequent, citing difficulty with access. The single telephone line connecting the village to the nearest exchange became unreliable, plagued by static and strange clicks, as if conversations were being monitored. The ministry's presence transformed from a nuisance into an occupying force. They were an army without an enemy, their purpose a complete mystery. The 112 souls of Emberstone were living inside a sealed laboratory, but they were not privy to the nature of the experiment. The fear was palpable. It wasn't a fear of invasion from a foreign power, but a cold, creeping dread of their own government. The very institution meant to protect them was now their jailer. Every cover-up requires a plausible story, a narrative clean and simple enough to be accepted without question. For the disappearance of Emberstone, that story was codenamed Operation Sundown. The document we managed to declassify, file MOD-UK 77B Sundown, is a masterpiece of bureaucratic obfuscation. It is 90% redaction, black ink obscuring names, dates, and objectives. But what remains tells the official tale. According to the Ministry of Defense, the area encompassing Emberstone and the surrounding 50,000 acres was deemed essential for a new phase of Cold War military training. The document speaks of the need for a sterile environment for advanced munitions and unconventional warfare simulations. The evacuation, it states, was a regrettable but necessary step to ensure civilian safety and national security. The operation was executed on October 15, 1953. The official narrative claims that villagers were given a 48-hour notice, compensated fairly for their properties under the Defense of the Realm Act, and relocated to newly constructed housing in a neighboring county. It was presented as a smooth, humane, and patriotic process. The document includes appendices with supposed transcripts of town hall meetings where village elders allegedly agreed to the terms, praising the government's generosity. It paints a picture of a cooperative community willing to make a sacrifice for the greater good. But the cracks in this official story are vast chasms. There are no public records of this mass relocation. No newspaper articles from the time mention the decommissioning of an entire village. The newly constructed housing has never been located. The compensation payments, supposedly made to 112 individuals, have no corresponding treasury records. It's as if the ministry created a paper trail within a closed system, a self-referential loop of falsified evidence designed to satisfy internal audits, never intended for public scrutiny. The name itself, Operation Sundown, is chillingly poetic. A sundown on a community, on 112 lives, on the truth. The file concludes with a single, less redacted sentence. Permanent area denial is to be maintained under Protocol 7. Public cartographic and census data to be amended post haste. They didn't just move a village. They erased it. They scrubbed it from maps, deleted it from records, and buried it under layers of classified ink, hoping the sun would set on Emberstone forever. The official story was sealed, the files locked away. Emberstone was gone. But secrets, like ghosts, rarely stay buried. The first anomaly, the first tear in the fabric of Operation Sundown, came from the sky. It came from the personal logbook of Flight Lieutenant Davies, an RAF pilot flying reconnaissance missions out of a nearby airbase. His logbook, a private record never meant for official review, was donated to a small aviation museum by his family after his death. For decades, it sat unexamined. We found it. The entry for October 15, 1953, the night of the evacuation, is chilling. Let me read it to you directly. 22:40 hours. Commencing final leg of coastal patrol. Call sign Nightjar 7. Deviated course inland due to unexpected atmospheric disturbance. Weather clear, but instruments showing severe magnetic interference. Unprecedented. He goes on to describe the technical details, but then his professional tone shifts. 22:55 hours. Approximate position 5 miles east of Emberstone Valley. Observed intense non-terrestrial light source originating from ground level within the valley. Not a fire. The light was a deep, pulsating violet, casting no shadows. It seemed to absorb the ambient moonlight. Repeat, it was casting no shadows. This is a critical observation from a trained professional. A light source, that powerful, should have illuminated the entire valley. Instead, Davies describes it as a hole in the light. He continues, 22:58 hours. The light coalesced into a perfect sphere, approximately 200 feet in diameter, hovering silently above the location of the village chapel. My co-pilot confirms visual. We attempted to radio the Anomaly to ground control, but all comms were dead. Nothing but white noise. My aircraft's electrical systems began to fail. Warning lights flashing across the board. And here is the most terrifying part. 23:01 hours. The sphere of violet light contracted violently in an instant into a single point and vanished. And with it, all ground lights from the village. One moment, Emberstone was there. Street lights, house windows, the familiar pattern of a sleeping town. The next, there was only absolute, primordial blackness. Not a power cut. It was a complete and total absence. The valley floor was a patch of pure black, as if the land itself had been scooped out. My instruments returned to normal. Comms restored. Filed an unofficial report upon landing. Was told in no uncertain terms to forget what I saw. That my transponder logs showed I never deviated from my coastal flight plan, and that my official report will reflect that. A direct order. But I saw it. We both did. Something happened to that village. It wasn't evacuated. It was taken. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. For decades, the story of Arborfell was nothing more than a ghost story, a whisper among locals in neighboring towns, a village that was there one day and gone the next. But ghosts leave traces, and in the digital age, those traces can be hunted. Our investigation began not in the dusty archives of a small-town library, but with the sterile, bureaucratic machinery of the state itself, a series of Freedom of Information Act requests. We filed them with the Department of the Interior, the U.S. Geological Survey, and, on a long shot, the Department of Energy. For 18 months, we were met with silence, form letter rejections, or claims that no such records existed. Then, a single manila envelope arrived. No return address. Inside, a stack of documents, poorly photocopied, streaked with black ink. These weren't clean digital redactions. This was the work of a human hand, thick and angry with a marker, desperate to conceal. The documents were from a defunct internal sub-agency we'd never heard of, the Office of Geographic Integrity, a name both Orwellian and terrifyingly specific. The first memo, dated April 1957, was almost entirely blacked out, but a few phrases survived in the margins, like prisoners peering through barred windows. Unforeseen escalation of the primary anomaly. Protocol 7 now in effect. Total media blackout is paramount. Protocol 7. The phrase appeared again and again, a drumbeat of dread. What was it? A second document, a land survey request, was even more chilling. It detailed a request for the immediate and permanent revision of all federal and state cartographic records pertaining to coordinate set, followed by a long, redacted block. They weren't just evacuating a town. They were performing a geographic execution, wiping it from memory, from history, from the very paper that proved its existence. The most disturbing document was a field report, seemingly written in haste. The author's handwriting grew frantic, sloping downwards. He describes initial readings as off the charts and mentions a pervasive, low-frequency resonance. Then a sentence fragment, circled in red pencil, escaped the censor's marker. The ground itself is becoming unreliable. Unreliable ground. What could that possibly mean? These fragments don't give us a complete picture, but they provide a frame. The disappearance of Arborfell wasn't an accident. It wasn't a flood or a fire. It was a deliberate, calculated act of erasure, orchestrated at a high level. The redactions don't just hide names and dates. They hide the why. They conceal a reason so profound, so dangerous, that the official narrative preferred a void, an empty space on a map where a village used to be, over the terrifying truth. The paper trail is cold, but it burns with a hidden fire. The government knew something was happening in Arborfell, and whatever it was, their only solution was to cut it out of the world like a cancer, leaving behind a scar of black ink and a silence that screams. Arthur Miller had one more thing to share. Tucked away in a dusty hatbox was a brittle, leather-bound photo album. Most photos were typical of the era, stiff family portraits, holiday gatherings. But then he turned to a page with a single curling photograph. "This is it," he whispered. "Main Street, Arborfell." The image was a haymaker to our investigation. For the first time, we weren't looking at redacted text or a wooden bird. We were looking at the place itself. It was a sepia-toned window into a lost world. A general store with a faded Coca-Cola sign, a small stone church, a dirt road bustling with people in 1950s attire. It was heartbreakingly normal. But the longer we looked, the more a sense of profound unease crept in. Something was fundamentally wrong with the picture. We brought in a forensic imaging specialist, Dr. Eris Thorne, who analyzed a high-resolution scan. At first glance, it's a perfectly preserved silver gelatin print from the mid-1950s, he explained, pointing to the scan on his monitor. The grain structure, the chemical aging, it's all authentic. This has not been manipulated. But his analysis went deeper. Look at the shadows, he said, zooming in on a group of children playing near the general store. The shadow of the building is cast to the northwest, indicating a late afternoon sun. But the shadows of the children, they're short, almost non-existent, as if the sun is directly overhead. It's a physical impossibility. Then he pointed to the sky, above the church steeple. He increased the contrast, and a faint, almost imperceptible distortion became visible. It wasn't a cloud or a lens flare. It's like a pocket of localized atmospheric lensing, Thorne mused. Like the air itself is bending light around an unseen object. The heat haze you see over a hot road, but there's snow on the rooftops. It makes no sense. The most chilling discovery came when he examined the architecture of the town hall at the far end of the street. Zooming in, the lines of the building seemed to subtly warp. A window that should have been rectangular had a slight, unsettling curve. The roofline appeared to be sagging in the middle, yet the structure beneath it was perfectly straight. It was a subtle, Escher-like violation of perspective and physics. This photograph was the smoking gun. It was irrefutable proof of Arborfell's existence, but it was also evidence of the anomaly mentioned in the government memos. The phenomenon that led to the town's erasure wasn't just a sound or a feeling. It was something that could be seen, something that warped light, bent shadows, and twisted the very fabric of reality. The photograph wasn't just a picture of a town. It was a picture of a place where the laws of physics were beginning to fray at the edges, and the people smiling for the camera had no idea they were standing on the brink of the impossible. The photograph and the old maps gave us our destination. Using the church steeple and a distant mountain peak as reference points, we triangulated the precise coordinates of what was once Arborfell's Main Street. The location today is a dense, unnervingly quiet section of National Forest. The trees are too uniform, the undergrowth too sparse. It feels curated, managed. And it is. The area is designated as a wilderness preserve, a convenient label to restrict public access. We enlisted the help of a geophysicist, who we'll call Evelyn, to conduct a discrete survey. She brought a proton precession magnetometer and a ground-penetrating radar unit. For the first few hours, the work was frustratingly normal. The GPR showed typical soil layers and rock formations. The magnetometer registered the Earth's background magnetic field with textbook consistency. We started to doubt our location. Maybe the trees had reclaimed everything, leaving no trace. Then we crossed it. It wasn't a visible line, but the equipment felt it instantly. The magnetometer, which had been emitting a steady low hum, suddenly shrieked. The digital readout became a blur of nonsensical numbers. "What is this?" Evelyn muttered, rebooting the device. "Interference? There's nothing out here." But it wasn't interference. As we moved deeper into the area where the town square should have been, the magnetic deviation intensified exponentially. "These readings are impossible," she said, her voice tight with a mix of excitement and fear. "This isn't an iron deposit. This is a massive, fluctuating magnetic field." The kind you'd expect to find near a particle accelerator, not in the middle of a forest. The GPR results were even more baffling. Beneath the topsoil and rock, about 30 feet down, was a structure. It wasn't the scattered foundations of old homes. The image on her screen showed a massive, unnaturally smooth, and perfectly geometric object. It was disc-shaped, hundreds of feet in diameter, and according to the GPR, composed of a material so dense that the radar waves couldn't penetrate it. It absorbed them completely, creating a black void in the scan. This was the source. This was the unreliable ground from the field report, the humming place from Arthur Miller's memory, the primary anomaly from the declassified memos. All the disparate pieces of our investigation, the redacted files, the fragmented memories, the impossible photograph, were now pointing to this spot, to a massive, inexplicable something buried deep beneath our feet. As Evelyn began packing up her equipment, a palpable change occurred in the atmosphere. The air grew heavy, charged with static. And then we heard it. Faintly at first, then growing in intensity. A low, resonant hum. It wasn't just a sound we heard with our ears. We felt it in our bones. A deep vibration rising from the earth itself. The ground was waking up. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some places aren't meant to be remembered. Narrator. The official record is a comfort. A neatly typed government-sanctioned story that smooths over the rough edges of history. In the case of the village of Oakhaven, the record states that on October 12, 1957, the entire population was evacuated due to critical geological instability discovered in the valley. A story of proactive governance, of lives saved. It's a clean narrative. Too clean. The problem arises when you stop reading the official summary and start examining the source documents. The threads of the official story don't just fray. They disintegrate entirely. The evacuation, as we are told it happened, simply does not align with the paper trail left behind. It was a ghost story written on government letterhead. Our investigation began in the National Archives, sifting through dusty census ledgers. The evacuation order was dated October 12th. Yet, in the supplementary census of 1958, conducted to update voter registrations, we found them. Name after name, street after street. The residents of Oakhaven still listed. Not as relocated, not as displaced, but as present. We found Thomas Miller, the baker, still registered at 14 Elm Street. We found Eleanor Vance, the school teacher, at the old schoolhouse. Over 200 names, a silent testament to a population that, according to the government, was 100 miles away. How can a village be simultaneously empty and fully occupied? This isn't a clerical error. It's a paradox, a fundamental contradiction at the heart of the official narrative. The documents scream that these people were still there. Then we uncovered the supply manifests. Rationing was still in effect for certain goods in post-war Britain. We cross-referenced Ministry of Food ledgers for the region. Shipments of sugar, flour, and tea were allocated and signed for by Oakhaven's postmaster, Mr. Arthur Finch, on dates extending well into 1959. We have a copy of a signed receipt here, dated March 2nd, 1959. The signature is a perfect match to his enlistment papers from the Great War. So, who was signing for these goods if the village was a ghost town? Was Arthur Finch a phantom, dutifully stocking the shelves of an empty shop for an absent populace? Or was the story of an empty village a lie? The logistical evidence points to a community that was very much alive, functioning and sustained by the state, long after the state claimed it had ceased to exist. Every document we unearth is another nail in the coffin of the official explanation. The evacuation wasn't just poorly documented. It feels like it never happened at all. It was a retroactive erasure, a story created after the fact to paper over a gaping, inexplicable hole in the British countryside. The real question isn't why they were evacuated, but what happened to them while they were still there, living their lives, completely unaware that on paper they had already vanished.
Narrator. Every grand deception requires a grand distraction, a singular, peculiar event that can be molded to fit a convenient narrative. For Oakhaven, that event occurred on the night of November 4th, 1959. The official explanation, filed by a local RAF outpost, is laughably simple. A high-altitude weather balloon, carrying sensitive meteorological equipment, malfunctioned and came down in the fields bordering the village. Case closed, but witness accounts from the surrounding hills tell a different story. They don't speak of a balloon gently descending, they speak of fire in the sky. Farmers in the neighboring parish of Blackwood reported a silent, blinding light that turned night into day, followed by a low, guttural hum that vibrated through the very ground. One shepherd, interviewed by a local paper before a D-notice was slapped on the story, described it as a falling star that changed its mind. He claimed it didn't fall, it descended, maneuvering with impossible precision, before disappearing behind the ridge that shielded Oakhaven from view. This was no weather balloon. Weather balloons don't make sharp, right-angle turns. Through a series of Freedom of Information Act requests, we obtained heavily redacted Ministry of Defense files from that week. The censorship is telling. Entire pages are blacked out, but what remains is tantalizing. We see call logs referencing unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAP, the military's term for what we might call a UFO. We see mobilization orders for a specialist unit we'd never heard of, the Royal Engineers Anomalous Recovery Division. Their mission profile? The retrieval and containment of non-terrestrial materials. Why deploy a top-secret unit designed to handle alien technology for a simple weather balloon? The dispatch logs show them arriving, not at the supposed crash site in the fields, but establishing a cordon directly around the perimeter of Oakhaven Village itself. The timeline is damning.
The aerial event occurs on November 4th. The military cordon is established by dawn on November 5th. By November 10th, the first Ordinance survey mappers receive instructions to begin the process of removing Oakhaven from all future publications. The weather balloon wasn't the incident. It was the catalyst. It was the public-facing excuse for an operation of unprecedented secrecy. Whatever came down from the sky that night didn't just land near Oakhaven. It landed in Oakhaven. And the subsequent quarantine and erasure of the village suggests that the authorities weren't recovering a fallen object. They were containing a contamination. The question is, was the contamination technological, biological, or something far stranger? Narrator. A cover-up of this magnitude cannot be executed by faceless committees alone. It requires an architect, a single authoritative presence to direct the pieces on the board, ensure silence, and enforce the official narrative. In the fragmented and whispered accounts surrounding Oakhaven's disappearance, one figure emerges from the shadows, a man known only by his function, the man from Whitehall. He had no name, or rather, he had many, none of them likely his own. He was the physical embodiment of the state's most secretive apparatus. eyewitnesses from neighboring villages interviewed decades later provide a chillingly consistent description. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, and always wore gray leather gloves, regardless of the weather. He arrived in a black, unmarked Humber Super Snipe, a vehicle reserved for the highest echelons of government. He wasn't a local official. He wasn't from the county council or the regional police. His authority was absolute, overriding all local chains of command. The local constable, a man named Peters, reportedly tried to question his jurisdiction and was quietly transferred to a remote post in the Orkney Islands less than a week later. The man from Whitehall didn't negotiate. He informed. He didn't ask. He instructed. He was seen in the days leading up to the weather balloon incident, walking the perimeter of the village, not speaking to anyone, simply observing. He carried a leather-bound folio, taking notes, his gaze sweeping over the landscape, the houses, the church spire. He was an assessor, a surveyor of a problem that was about to be solved with surgical precision. After the military cordon was established, he was the one in charge. Declassified logs, though heavily redacted, mention a Whitehall liaison with Omega-level clearance coordinating the operation on the ground. This was him. He was the one who signed the D-notices that gagged the local press. He was the one who oversaw the teams of cartographers, who would later wipe Oakhaven from existence. One retired RAF pilot, speaking on condition of anonymity, told us, "You didn't question an order that came from his office. You just did it. We were told the area was a matter of national security, a threat greater than the Soviets. He was the face of that threat." This man was not just a bureaucrat. He was a custodian of secrets, a professional eraser of inconvenient truths. His presence confirms that what happened in Oakhaven wasn't an accident or a natural disaster. It was a deliberate, meticulously planned, and ruthlessly executed state action, orchestrated by the deepest, darkest corners of the government. Narrator. When the official records are sealed and the historical documents are burned, truth doesn't die. It seeps into the soil, into the water, and into the stories people tell. The final chapter of Oakhaven isn't written in government archives. It's whispered in the pubs of neighboring towns and passed down through generations like a chilling family heirloom. The land where the village once stood is now part of a restricted military training area, fenced off with stern warnings against trespassing. But locals know better. They say the fences aren't just to keep people out, they're to keep something in. The folklore that has grown around the vanished valley is a tapestry of high strangeness and paranormal dread. Hikers who have strayed too close to the perimeter fence report bizarre equipment malfunctions. Compasses spin uselessly, GPS signals die, and batteries drain in an instant. They speak of an unnatural silence that blankets the area, a dead zone where not even birds sing. Then there are the lights. For decades, people have reported seeing faint, cold, blue-green lights moving through the empty valley on moonless nights. They don't flicker like torchlight. They pulse, slowly, rhythmically, like a deep-sea creature breathing in the dark. There is no official explanation for these lights. No power lines run through the valley, and military exercises are never conducted there after dark. The most pervasive and disturbing tales, however, are auditory. On still nights, when the wind is just right, some claim you can hear the faint, ghostly echo of a church bell tolling. There has been no church in that valley
for over 60 years. Others speak of hearing children's laughter on the breeze, a sound that cuts through the oppressive silence with horrifying clarity. One local urban legend, popular among teenagers, is the story of the Oak Haven Glitch. They say that sometimes, for a few seconds, if you're looking at the right spot at the right time, the valley flickers. The empty fields and overgrown foundations are momentarily replaced by the image of the intact village, lights on in the windows, smoke curling from the chimneys, a perfect snapshot of a place that doesn't exist. It's a ghost imprinted on the very fabric of reality. These stories, whether they are folktales, mass hysteria, or genuine encounters with the unexplained, serve a vital purpose. They are the unofficial archive. They are the collective memory of a place the authorities tried to make the world forget. They suggest that whatever happened in Oak Haven wasn't an end. It was a transformation. The village wasn't just removed from maps. It was shifted into a different state of being, leaving behind a permanent scar on the landscape, a wound in reality that continues to haunt the living. Write in the comments where you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like. Some places aren't meant to be found because they were never meant to exist. Welcome back to the Obsidian Archive. For years, the story of Silverton has been a ghost story, a cartographical anomaly whispered among urban explorers and conspiracy analysts. A village that existed one day and was gone the next, scrubbed from maps, records, and memory. We've examined the official explanations, clerical errors, planned relocations, geological subsidence, and found them all wanting. They are flimsy veils over a chasm of unanswered questions. Today we descend deeper into that chasm. We're looking at a hypothesis so disturbing, so deeply buried in the blackest of budgets, that its very name feels like a state secret. Project Chimera. The name itself, drawn from the fire-breathing hybrid of Greek mythology, is a warning. It suggests the fusion of disparate, unnatural elements. Through heavily redacted Freedom of Information requests and hushed conversations with sources who will never be named, a terrifying picture begins to form. Project Chimera was not a myth. It was an umbrella designation for a series of highly classified, off-the-books experiments conducted by a joint military scientific task force in the late 1970s, the exact period Silverton vanished. The project's mandate was chillingly broad: next-generation strategic denial and environmental neutralization. It wasn't about building a better weapon. It was about unmaking a location. It was about making a piece of the world and everyone in it cease to be. The few declassified fragments we have are almost entirely blacked out, but the words that remain are haunting. Phrases like localized chronal distortion, non-Euclidean resonance fields, and mass psychological erasure appear in the margins. This wasn't a conventional operation. This was theoretical physics weaponized. The hypothesis is this: Silverton was not evacuated. It was not destroyed by a bomb. It was the testing ground for Project Chimera. The village and its inhabitants were subjected to a technology designed to remove a target from physical reality, or at the very least from our perception of it. Think of it as a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, excising a tumor from the map with terrifying precision. One source, a former signals intelligence analyst, spoke to us on the condition of absolute anonymity. His voice, distorted to protect his identity, described intercepting bizarre, looping transmissions from the region in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. "It wasn't code," he said. "It sounded like architecture, like the sound of a building humming a song it shouldn't know." This aligns with the Chimera document's references to resonance fields. Was the entire valley being tuned to a new frequency, one incompatible with our reality? This theory, as outlandish as it sounds, is the only one that fits the totality of the evidence, the suddenness, the completeness of the erasure, and the deafening, decades-long official silence. A clerical error doesn't require this level of secrecy. A failed experiment with a reality-bending weapon does. If Project Chimera was indeed deployed at Silverton, what would be left behind? Not rubble, not a crater. The documents suggest a clean operation. But no wound is ever truly clean. There is always a scar. For decades, the exact location of Silverton was a matter of debate. With the village erased from official maps, only the memories of a few elderly locals and the work of dedicated independent researchers could approximate its coordinates. But with the advent of public access, high-resolution satellite imagery, we can finally look down from the heavens and see what the government has tried so hard to hide. When you input the estimated coordinates into modern geospatial platforms, you find nothing. Just an unbroken expanse of the Silverwood National Forest. At first glance, the cover-up seems perfect. But technology offers new ways of seeing. We commissioned a multispectral analysis of the area from a remote sensing expert who specializes in identifying clandestine activity. What she found is unnerving. When viewed in the near-infrared spectrum, which is used to assess vegetation health, a distinct and unnatural shape emerges from the forest canopy. It is a roughly circular patch of land, several square kilometers in size, where the vegetation is measurably less healthy, almost stunted. The trees are there, but they don't grow as tall. The underbrush is sparse. It is, in her words, an ecological dead zone masquerading as a forest. This is the scar of Silverton. It's not a crater from an explosion, but something far more insidious. Soil samples, covertly retrieved from the periphery of the zone, show no signs of conventional chemical or radioactive contamination. Yet, something is profoundly wrong. The microorganisms that form the foundation of a healthy forest ecosystem are almost entirely absent. It's as if the land itself has been sterilized on a fundamental level. Furthermore, ground-penetrating radar scans reveal another anomaly beneath the surface. There are no foundations, no cellars, no remnants of the village you would expect to find. Instead, the radar shows that the bedrock itself, dozens of feet down, appears fractured and vitrified in a strange, crystalline pattern, a pattern inconsistent with any known geological process. It's as if a focused wave of immense energy penetrated the earth, altering its very structure before dissipating. This physical evidence directly contradicts the planned relocation story. You don't sterilize the soil and vitrify the bedrock when you move a village. This scar is evidence of an event, a singular, powerful, and technologically advanced event that didn't just remove the town. It fundamentally rewrote the landscape itself, leaving behind a permanent, ghostly fingerprint, visible only to the machines we put in orbit. Theories and satellite data can paint a cold, impersonal picture of what might have happened to Silverton. They speak of energy fields and ecological dead zones, but they don't speak of the people. The men, women, and children who lived their lives, celebrated birthdays, and went to sleep one night,
only to be erased from the world. What were their final days like? What did they see? What did they feel? Official records are a dead end. But sometimes history survives in the most mundane of places. In this case, it was a dusty box in the attic of a home in a neighboring state, discovered after the passing of its owner. Inside was a bundle of old correspondence. Among them was a single letter, postmarked just 3 days before the date Silverton officially ceased to exist. It was the last known piece of communication to ever leave the village. The letter was written by a woman named Ilara Vance to her sister. We have had it authenticated by forensic document examiners. It is genuine. A voice actor will now read excerpts. The visuals you are seeing are recreations based on the letter's descriptions. Dearest Clara, it begins. Forgive the shaky hand. Things have been strange here. It started about 2 weeks ago. There's a sound now. A low hum. You feel it more than you hear it, deep in your teeth. It never stops. At night, there are lights over the ridge. Not planes, not stars. They are silent, and they move in ways that make your head hurt to look at. Old Man Hemlock says it's the military from the base over the mountain, but these aren't helicopters. They leave no wind, no noise. They just are. The letter's tone shifts from curiosity to anxiety. People are changing, Clara. Mr. Abernathy, who has run the general store for 40 years, just stood staring at the canned peaches for an hour yesterday. Didn't say a word. Just staring. His eyes were empty. The children have stopped playing in the woods.
They say the trees are whispering things they don't understand. They draw pictures of crooked men with no faces. The final paragraph is where the dread truly sets in. Something is wrong with the time. I'll be washing dishes, and suddenly it's dark outside and I don't remember the afternoon. I found my mail in the refrigerator this morning. I don't remember putting it there. Everyone seems to be losing little pieces of their day. We feel thin, like we're a photograph that's been left out in the sun. I'm scared. I don't know what's happening to us. I'm going to mail this on my way to the... The letter ends there, mid-sentence, as if the thought, and perhaps the writer herself, simply dissolved. This isn't just a letter. It is a final, desperate testament from inside a place that was beginning to unravel. The humming, the lights, the cognitive decay, the temporal distortions. It's a near-perfect match for the theoretical side effects described in the most terrifying sections of the Project Chimera file. The people of Silverton knew something was happening. They just didn't have the words for it. They were the first and last witnesses to their own deletion.
We are left standing at the edge of an abyss, staring into a darkness that stares back. We have a classified weapons program, Project Chimera, with a mandate to make places disappear. We have a scar on the land, an ecological wound visible from space that defies conventional explanation. And we have a final haunting letter, a voice from the void describing the cognitive unraveling of an entire community. What does it all mean? When pieced together, the fragments form a narrative so chilling it borders on the unbelievable. The official story of Silverton is a lie, not just a misdirection, but a carefully constructed fiction designed to conceal a terrible truth. The village was not relocated. It was a laboratory. Its people were not citizens to be protected. They were variables in an equation. The unresolved file on Silverton isn't just a collection of papers in a government basement. It is a monument to an event that should not have been possible. It represents a threshold that was crossed, a technological and ethical Rubicon from which there is no return. The questions that remain are as terrifying as the evidence we've uncovered. Was Project Chimera a success? Did they achieve their goal of strategic denial? If so, where did Silverton go? Is it in another dimension? Another time? Or was it simply deleted? A file dragged to the recycle bin of reality? Or was it a failure? A catastrophic accident that they couldn't control, an event that breached the walls of our world and was hastily, brutally cauterized and covered up, leaving behind nothing but a ghost town-shaped hole in the world. The silence from the government is perhaps the most damning evidence of all. Decades have passed. The Cold War is over. The individuals responsible are likely long gone. Yet the file remains sealed. The land remains unofficially quarantined. Any inquiry is met with a wall of bureaucratic denial. They are not protecting state secrets from a bygone era. They are protecting us from a concept. The knowledge that a place, a home, a memory can be surgically removed from existence. The legacy of Silverton is a chilling whisper in the modern age that the map is not the territory, and that there are forces with the power to erase parts of that territory at will. The file remains open, unresolved, and waiting. And as long as it does, we must continue to ask the questions, to dig through the archives, and to remember the village that was, so that we never forget what we stand to lose. The truth is not in the files. The truth is in the void that they left behind.